The main goal of the EU movement is to get the Legends universe to continue alongside the new Disney canon. It's been so long since the EU was largely discontinued back in 2014, and EU fans have barely gotten any new content for close to a decade now. But just because we're starving and desperate for new Legend stories, don't make the mistake in assuming that we'll accept whatever crap Lucasfilm gives us. I've already made 2 videos of potential Legend stories that could still be told. Likewise, if Legends do ever get continued, then here are 5 Legend stories that I don't think need to be made. A quick disclaimer though, I'm not saying I'm inherently opposed to any of the ideas that I'm going to be mentioning in this video. If we ever do get new Legend stories, and they cover one of these 5 topics, as long as it's written well, I won't be upset about it. Number 5. Another story where the Solo kids get kidnapped. If you're familiar with the Bantam era of Star Wars in the 90s, then you're more than likely familiar with the trope of Jacen, Jaina, and Anakin Solo being continually kidnapped or facing attempted kidnapping. I don't think this was done out of laziness, because there are many in-universe and out-of-universe reasons for this to happen. In-universe, of course the Imperial Remnant would target Han and Leia's kids. Han is a rebellion war hero, and Leia is a very powerful and well-known politician in the New Republic. If you're the Empire, having those kids would be a heck of a bargaining chip. In addition to that, the Solo kids are all very powerful in the Force, so converting them to the dark side would make them very valuable assets. Ambassador Fergan even tried to kidnap Anakin Solo as an infant to raise him as the next Emperor. And out of universe, Han and Leia are characters maturing into adulthood. They're married, they just had kids. Well, to raise the stakes and make those characters really invested in the story, as a writer, you put those kids in serious danger. Also, it makes the bad guys look super evil for targeting children. And story-wise, there's not a whole lot else you can do with babies or toddlers if you want to include them in the action-adventure genre. Otherwise, Auntie Winter can always babysit them if you don't want them around. Regardless, the kidnapping Solo kids plotline has been done so many times that I don't think there's much point in telling another one. That said, I put it low on the list because if Lucasfilm does write another New Republic era story where the Solo kids get kidnapped, then I don't think I could help but feel a little nostalgic for that old Bantam era. Number 4. Stories featuring Obi-Wan Kenobi and Anakin Skywalker during the Clone Wars. Did you know that at one point, the Clone Wars era was one of the most meticulously planned periods in the Star Wars timeline? Certain events are established in order, sometimes down to the exact day. Then everything changed when Filoni attacked. And the once thoughtfully plotted out timeline created by the Clone Wars Multimedia Project was plagued by numerous continuity errors. Even disregarding the chaos caused by the CGI Clone Wars show, Obi-Wan and Anakin's adventures flooded that 3-year time span between episodes 2 and 3. And boy did it get crowded with the already existing adventures in the Multimedia Project, the TCW movie, the TCW show, and all the tie-in material like books, comics, and games. TCW could have been a companion piece to the original Clone Wars, showcasing all the stories from side characters that we didn't see much of while introducing new characters. And it did that a little bit, but for the most part it was the Obi-Wan, Anakin, and Ahsoka show, and it took a wrecking ball to the lore. That's why I don't think we need more Clone Wars era legend stories about Anakin and Obi-Wan specifically. Getting new stories of other characters during that time is fine. In fact, I more than welcome it. Number 3. Stories regarding the Rebels stealing the Death Star plans. Back in the day, everyone wanted to tell the story of how the Rebels stole the Death Star plans. And who wouldn't? That's the tale of what leads up to the very first movie. And George never explicitly said how the Death Star plans were stolen. That was a story left up to the expanded universe authors. And I guess the rules involving continuity weren't super strict, because it felt like everyone and their grandma got to write a story about how the Death Star plans were stolen. We had the radio play, X-Wing, Dark Forces, Lethal Alliance, and Empire at War all told some version of how the Death Star plans were taken. It got to the point where people critiqued the EU for how many different times this had happened. And they kinda had a point. It got a little out of hand. Luckily, they were able to make it all make sense by retconning it so that it was multiple people stealing multiple parts of the superweapon plans. After all, the Death Star is a massive moon-sized structure that the Empire was trying to keep secret. It does make sense that the entirety of the station's plans are going to be split into pieces. But I don't think a lot of EU fans are dying for another story about how the plans get stolen from the Empire. Number 2. Stories about Han, Luke, and Leia shortly after A New Hope. Speaking of stories that everyone wanted to tell, there is so much Rebellion-era content. More specifically, the period following Episode 4. And again, I don't blame them. That's during the original trilogy, featuring the Big Three, not to mention Vader's still around. It's what people think of when you say Star Wars. But it did not take long for that time period to fill up. And unlike all the stories about stealing the Death Star plans, stories that took place shortly after the Battle of Yavin continued being made right up until the EU's decanonization in 2014. We got the original Marvel comic run, the day after the Death Star one-shot, Star Wars Missions, Scoundrels, Rebel Force, Allegiance, Choices of One, the Pizzazz comics, the Brian Wood comics, the newspaper comics, Vader's Quest, Devil Worlds, and probably a few others I forgot about, all taking place within just a few months after the Battle of Yavin. I think Matt Wilkins once joked that none of these characters had time to go to the bathroom because of how many adventures they went on, and it's pretty easy to see why. I'm not saying we shouldn't get any more stories about Han, Luke, and Leia, and I know that the temptation to set it during the OT is great, but that ground is very well trodden. If you want to write a new Legends novel about Han, Luke, and Leia, may I suggest setting it in a different time period? If you want to write a new Legends novel that takes place after A New Hope, may I suggest writing about different characters? And number 1, stories that introduce characters from the new canon. If someone made a new Legends story of the last 4 story ideas I've talked about so far, despite it not being the most original premise, I'd still probably welcome it to the EU family, and I would definitely give it a chance. But making a new Legends story that introduces characters from the Disney continuity is a bad idea. The Legends universe and the new Disney canon universe are very well established as taking place in separate continuities, and that's exactly where they belong. Even if it's the wrong direction, and it often is involving Disney canon, I applaud when they go a different path from the EU. When they discontinued and decanonized it back in 2014, they said they couldn't use it because it limited their creative freedom. Never mind the fact that that has nothing to do with why Legends can't be continued separately. When they put EU characters in the new canon, that means they can't handle creative freedom. They don't know what to do with it. Taking characters from Disney canon and dropping them into the EU shows a lack of creativity, just like it does the other way around. For some ungodly reason, new canon fans want to have our beloved characters from the EU inserted into their continuity. It doesn't matter how lazy or forced, or how much it doesn't make any sense. Every time I see the new canon do it, it's always as a crutch. Their continuity can't stand on its own, and needs to rely on EU characters for help. What would even be the point of putting someone like Rey in Legends? What would she even do? Are you gonna give her the exact same story from the sequel movies? If so, then why go through the trouble of telling an identical story? Or are you gonna change things around? If so, then why not just make a new character if they're gonna be so radically different and unrecognizable? Characters are more than just a name and a face. They, like all of us, are influenced by their experiences and their environment. Unfortunately, I don't think this is understood by the myriad of people who are constantly asking for EU characters to be in the new canon. They would not be the same character, period. Furthermore, while it is rather common for someone asking for a fan-favorite EU character to become canon, I think you'd be hard-pressed to find an EU fan who would want a new canon character appearing in their continuity. But what do you all think? Is there anything on this list that you agree or disagree with? And if the EU ever does get continued, what storylines would you want to see, and what storylines could you do without? Please let me know in the comment section.